The Alpha King hid his crown, and the rejected Omega chose him when he looked like nothing. Emily Carter stood beneath the silver moon lanterns of Moonridge Hall, with every eye in the pack fixed on her pale face, waiting for her shame to become official. The mating circle had been swept clean, the candle still burning, the white ribbon still hanging from the rafters like promises meant for someone else. 6 Omegas had already been claimed, 6 names had been spoken with pride, 6 families had cried with joy. And Emily, in her simple ivory dress, stood alone at the center of the room, while the silence pressed against her ribs. Dylan Brooks stepped forward at last, broad-shouldered, polished, smiling like a man doing the world a favor. He had once whispered that the moon might have made them for each other. Now he looked at her as if she were an old mistake. "I reject Emily Carter as my mate," he said, clear enough for the elders, the guests, and the servants near the doors to hear. A soft gasp moved through the hall. Emily did not move. She had promised herself she would not tremble. Dylan's smile sharpened. An Omega without a true scent cannot stand beside an Alpha. I need a mate who strengthens my bloodline, not one the moon forgot. Laughter flickered around the room, quiet at first, then warmer, easier, crueler. Emily felt it touch her skin like cold rain. Her wolf, faint and wounded inside her, curled deeper into silence. Elder Marlowe lifted his staff, his face carved with discomfort he did not have the courage to name. "Is there any male here who will accept Emily Carter under moon law?" No one answered, not one voice, not one step. Emily lowered her eyes to the marble floor, counting the cracks between the stones, because it was easier than counting the faces that had turned away from her. Then the doors opened. The sound was not loud, but the whole hall seemed to feel it. 2 guards entered first, escorting a man in a dark, weather-worn cloak. Silver restraint cords circled his wrists, not tight, but visible enough to mark him as someone unwanted. He walked with a limp, leaning on a black cane, his head lowered beneath the hood that hid most of his face. A murmur spread through the room. A border stray, a broken wolf, a man with no house, no title, no worth. Emily heard the whispers gather around him before he even reached the circle, but when he lifted his face, she forgot how to breathe. His eyes were silver gray, calm as winter light on a frozen lake, and they did not search the crowd, they found her. Elder Marlowe frowned. "You have no standing here." The stranger's voice came low, steady, and strangely gentle. "Then let the girl decide." Dylan laughed. "You think she would choose you?" The stranger did not look at him. He only looked at Emily, as if her answer mattered more than the judgment of everyone in the room. "I will accept her," he said, "if she chooses me." The hall erupted in whispers, but Emily heard only the quiet space between his words. Not pity, not demand, a choice. For the first time that night, someone had offered her one. She stepped toward him, heart pounding, cheeks burning, every cruel stare trying to pull her back into shame. Dylan's voice cut across the room. "Emily, don't make yourself even more pathetic." She stopped. For one breath, the old fear rose inside her. Then the stranger's restrained hands tightened around the cane, and something in his eyes softened, not with weakness, but with sorrow he understood too well. Emily lifted her chin. "Then I choose him." The laughter died so quickly it felt like the moon itself had gone still. For one suspended second, Moonridge Hall forgot how to breathe. Emily Carter could feel every stare shift from mockery to disbelief, as if choosing the unwanted man had broken some sacred rule written beneath the marble floor. The stranger remained still, his silver-gray eyes fixed on her with a quiet intensity that made the noise around them blur. Then Dylan Brooks laughed, loud and bright and cruel enough to give everyone else permission to follow. "Of course," he said, spreading his hands as if presenting a joke to the crowd. "The scentless Omega chooses the broken stray. The moon has a sense of humor after all." A few voices joined him. Someone near the refreshment table murmured that Emily had finally found her proper match. Another called the man a border cripple with no pack worth naming, The words came from every side, polished by wealth, sharpened by pride, tossed carelessly because no one believed either of them had the power to answer. Emily kept her chin lifted, but her fingers tightened in the skirt of her dress. She had survived whispers before. She had survived pity, disappointment, and the long silence of rooms where people stopped speaking when she entered. But this was different. This was public. This was ceremony. This was her shame dressed in candlelight. Elder Marlowe struck his staff once against the floor. Enough. Yet his voice carried no true command, only tired embarrassment. The stranger stepped into the mating circle, the silver cords around his wrists catching the light. Up close, Emily could see the details hidden by distance, the faint stubble along his jaw, the pale line of an old scar near his temple, the way his right hand gripped the cane while his left remained loose and steady. He looked worn, yes, tired, yes, but not defeated, never defeated. "Your name," Elder Marlowe demanded. The man paused just long enough for the hall to lean in. Evan Hale. It was a simple name, too simple. It rippled through the room and landed nowhere, belonging to no noble house, no known bloodline, no alliance worth courting. Dylan clicked his tongue. Evan Hale. How touching. Tell me, Hale, do you plan to protect her with that cane or your tragic silence? A few young wolves snickered. Emily felt heat climb into her cheeks. Evan did not look at Dylan. He looked at the elder. Under moon law, she was offered a choice. She made it. His calm made the insult feel smaller. That, more than anger, unsettled the room. Dylan stepped closer, lowering his voice, though everyone still heard him. Emily, think carefully. You were rejected tonight, not banished. You can still return to your family quietly, but if you leave with him, you become his problem, his burden, his mistake. The word should have bent her. It almost did. Then Evan turned his head, and for the first time, Emily saw something flicker behind his eyes. Not rage, not pride, but restraint. As if he had been called worse and had learned to carry it without letting it own him. "She is not a burden," he said softly. The softness silenced more people than a shout could have. Emily looked at him, and something inside her fragile, hidden wolf stirred. Not fully, not proudly, just enough to remind her she was still alive. At the edge of the circle, a girl dropped a wilted white flower near Emily's feet. "A wedding gift," she whispered, and laughter followed. Emily stared at the crushed petals. Then Evan moved, slowly, carefully. He bent with visible effort, picked up the flower, and held it out to Emily as if it were something precious. "May I?" he asked. Her throat tightened. She nodded. He tucked the flower into the ribbon at her wrist, his fingers never lingering, never taking more than permission allowed. The hall watched, confused by gentleness where they had expected shame. Dylan's smile faded. Elder Marlowe cleared his throat. "If this match is to stand, both must sign the mate contract before moonset." Evan's gaze did not leave Emily. "Only if she still wishes it." Every eye turned to her again, hungry for hesitation. Emily looked at the flower on her wrist, then at the man no one wanted. "I do." And for the second time that night, the hall went silent. Elder Marlowe led them to the long oak table beneath the moon window, where every mate contract in Moonridge had been signed for nearly 200 years. The table was carved with old family names, proud bloodlines, and promises that had been celebrated with music and silver bells. Emily had imagined standing there once with flowers in her hair and her mother crying softly in the front row. Instead, she stood beside a man in restraint cords while the room watched as if her future were a punishment they had paid to witness. A clerk placed the parchment before them and dipped the black quill into ink. "This contract binds both parties under moon law," Elder Marlowe said, his voice low. "It grants household rights, travel rights, and public mate recognition until either party petitions before a royal court." Dylan gave a quiet laugh from behind her. A royal court, I doubt either of them will ever stand close enough to a palace gate. Emily did not turn around. She kept her eyes on the parchment, on the empty line where her name waited. Evan stood beside her, silent, but she could feel his presence like a wall between her and the room. Not warm, not soft, solid. Elder Marlowe pushed the quill toward Emily first. Once you sign, you leave this hall under his protection. Moonridge will not be required to receive you back without council approval. There it was, the final door closing. Not spoken with cruelty, but with relief. She was not being matched. She was being removed. Emily looked toward the back of the hall, where her aunt stood with folded arms and a pale, tight expression. No protest came. No hand reached for her. The last fragile thread of home slipped quietly from Emily's chest. Evan leaned closer. His voice meant only for her, though the nearest guest strained to hear. You do not have to do this because they cornered you. The words surprised her. Everyone else wanted her decision to end the embarrassment quickly. He was the only one offering her a way out. Emily looked at his bound wrist, then at his face beneath the hood. And where would I go? His jaw tightened. Away from me, if that is what you choose. Something in the answer unsettled her more than any insult had. He was warning her, not claiming her, protecting her from a road she had not even seen yet. If you come with me, he said quietly, your life will never be quiet again. Outside, wind pressed against the stained glass and the moonlight shifted across the floor like water. Emily thought of years spent lowering her voice, shrinking her steps, apologizing for a weakness she had never chosen. Quiet had never saved her. Quiet had only taught others how easily she could be ignored. She took the quill. Her hand trembled once before she steadied it. It was never kind here anyway. Then she signed her name in careful letters, Emily Rose Carter. The ink shone wet and dark beneath the moon window. Evan stared at the signature as if it had struck something deep behind his ribs. For a moment, his mask slipped. Pain, gratitude, and disbelief crossed his face so quickly that Emily wondered if she had imagined it. Then he accepted the quill. The silver cord shifted around his wrists, and several people leaned forward, expecting him to struggle. He did not. His hand moved with elegant control, far too practiced for a nameless border stray. He wrote only 2 words. Evan Hale. The clerk dusted the parchment with white sand. Elder Marlowe raised the contract for the room to witness. By moon law, the bond is recorded. A bitter cheer rose from the crowd, thin and mocking, but Emily barely heard it. Evan turned to her and offered his arm. Not as a master, not as a savior, but as a man asking permission to walk beside her. She placed her hand lightly on his sleeve. The moment they touched, a faint silver warmth moved beneath her skin, gone before she could understand it. Evan felt it too. She saw it in the sudden stillness of his breath. And as they walked toward the doors, leaving the candles, the whispers, and Dylan Brooks behind, Emily realized the man everyone called broken was hiding something powerful enough to make the moonlight follow him. The road beyond Moonridge narrowed into a black ribbon between sleeping pines, and every mile carried Emily farther from the life that had just released her without sorrow. A thin mist rolled over the ground, pale beneath the moon, softening the wagon tracks and swallowing the distant lights of the Pack estate until they disappeared completely. Evan walked beside her rather than ahead, leaning on his cane with a careful rhythm that should have made him seem fragile. Yet every time an owl stirred in the trees or a branch snapped somewhere in the dark, his body shifted before Emily could even turn her head, not fearful, ready. That was the first thing she noticed after the hall fell behind them. The second was that the silver restraint cords around his wrists were gone. She had not seen him remove them. One moment they had shimmered in the moonlight. The next, his hands were free beneath the edge of his cloak, and the cords had vanished as if they had never held him at all. Emily should have asked. Instead, she held the wilted flower at her wrist and kept walking. because some part of her understood that questions had weight, and Evan Hale was carrying more than any stranger should. After nearly 2 miles, they reached a narrow bridge over a frozen creek. Evan stopped before crossing, scanning the tree line with those winter-gray eyes. "Stay close," he said. His voice remained calm, but the forest seemed to obey it. Even the wind lowered itself. Emily stepped nearer. "Are we being followed?" Evan did not answer quickly. "Not by anyone brave enough to show themselves." A chill moved across her shoulders that had nothing to do with the cold. They crossed the bridge and climbed a ridge where the land opened into the Northwood border, wild and quiet under a sky crowded with stars. At the top stood a small stone house tucked against the pines, its windows dark, its roof dusted with frost. It was not the broken shelter Emily had imagined for a nameless stray. It was plain, yes, but solid, protected. The front path had been swept clean. Firewood was stacked with military precision. Small silver bells hung above the door. Not decorative, but placed at exact distances, ready to sound if anyone crossed beneath them. Evan opened the door and stepped aside. It is not much. Emily entered and found warmth waiting inside. A low fire had been banked in the hearth. 2 blankets lay folded over a chair. A kettle rested on the stove. Someone had prepared this place. Someone had expected him to return. On one wall hung no portraits, no family crests, nothing that spoke of a past. But beside the hearth stood a rack of walking canes, each one polished, each one balanced differently. Props. She realized with a strange tightening in her chest. Not tools. Evan noticed her looking. "Old habits," he said. "Most people see what they are told to see." Emily turned toward him. Without the noise of Moonridge Hall around them, he looked taller, darker, impossible to place. "And what did you want them to see?" His hand rested lightly on the doorframe. For one breath, she thought he might tell her the truth. Then his expression closed like a locked gate. A man not worth fearing. The answer should have comforted her. It did not. Later, as Emily warmed her hands by the fire, she watched Evan move through the little house with quiet efficiency. He checked the windows, the back door, the ashes in the hearth, and a mark carved into the inside of the threshold. A weak man would have rested after such a journey. Evan looked as if he had entered a battlefield no one else could see. When he finally placed a cup of tea beside her, his fingers brushed the edge of her sleeve, and that same silver warmth stirred beneath her skin. Her wolf lifted its head in the dark of her soul, faint, confused, awake. Evan froze, his gaze dropping to her wrist as the wilted flower trembled without wind. Then, somewhere far beyond the trees, a bell rang once. Evan turned toward the sound, and the gentleness left his face. "Emily," he said quietly, "do not open the door for anyone but me." The bell rang again, softer this time, as if the forest itself had touched it with a warning hand. Evan crossed the room in 3 silent steps, no longer leaning on the cane the way he had in Moonridge Hall. Emily noticed it before he seemed to. His limp had nearly vanished. His shoulders were straight beneath the dark cloak, and when he reached for the latch, his movements carried the calm precision of someone trained to survive more than winter roads. "Stay by the hearth," he said. Emily did, though every instinct in her wanted to follow. Through the small window, she saw him step into the moonlit yard and disappear between the pines. No shout came. No clash, only the low murmur of voices carried by the wind. Then silence so complete it made the fire seem loud. Minutes passed. Emily held the warm teacup between both hands, trying not to imagine the faces waiting beyond the trees. When Evan returned, he was alone. Snow dusted his shoulders, his expression revealed nothing, but his eyes moved at once to her face, checking, measuring, making sure fear had not taken root too deeply. "Who was it?" she asked. He closed the door and slid the bolt into place. Men who were told to look for a helpless stray and his new mate. Her pulse tightened. "By Moonridge," By someone who wants Moonridge afraid. That answer did not explain enough, but it explained too much. Emily watched him remove a small cloth pouch from inside his cloak and place it on the table, then another, then a folded packet sealed with plain twine. They were not weapons, not coins, not secrets of war. They were medicine bundles, dried herbs, and small paper envelopes marked with names. Mrs. Bell, Tommy Reed, the Miller twins. People, not soldiers. Evan followed her gaze. There's a settlement about 3 miles east. Fever came through 2 weeks ago. Their healer ran out of supplies. Emily blinked. You went outside because of medicine? Because they needed it before morning. He said it like there was no nobility in the act. Like walking into danger for strangers was as ordinary as adding wood to the fire. Something inside Emily shifted. At Moonridge, strength had always been loud. It wore polished boots, lifted its chin, demanded a room fall silent. But here, in a stone house near the border, strength looked like labeled medicine packets and a man who let the world call him broken, so frightened villagers could sleep. The next morning, pale sunlight filtered through frost on the windows. Evan left before dawn. And this time Emily followed at a distance, wrapping her shawl tightly around her shoulders. She expected him to turn back, to scold her, to remind her that this was not her concern. He did none of those things. He simply slowed his pace so she could keep up without admitting she was struggling. Beyond the pines, a cluster of cabins appeared in a valley of white fields. Smoke rose from chimneys. Children watched from doorways. An older woman stepped onto a porch when she saw Evan and pressed a hand to her chest with quiet relief. You came back, she said. I said I would. He handed her the medicine bundles and refused the coin she tried to give him. Emily stood beside the road, unseen at first, until a little boy with a red scarf pointed at her. Is she yours? The question was innocent, but the whole porch went still. Evan looked at Emily, not with possession, not with pride, but with a careful respect that warmed her more than the rising sun. She is her own, he said. But she walked here with me. The older woman smiled at Emily then, not with pity, not with judgment, but welcome. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Emily did not feel like a mistake standing in someone else's doorway. On the walk back, she looked at Evan and understood the first dangerous truth about him. Whatever name he had given her, whatever weakness he had shown the world, his heart had never been small. By late afternoon, the valley had changed. The quiet cabin still smoked beneath the pale winter sky, and the children still chased each other along the fence line. But every adult Emily passed wore the same guarded look, as if a storm had been announced before the clouds arrived. At the last cottage, a rider waited beside a restless gray horse, his cloak marked with the black raven seal of the royal council. Evan saw the seal before Emily did. His face went still, all warmth retreating behind the calm mask she had begun to fear. The rider bowed too quickly, not with respect, but with panic. Lord Mason Crow has declared the throne vacant, he said. He claims the Alpha King died beyond the northern border. Moonridge has been chosen to host the confirmation of a new ruler by tomorrow night. Emily felt the air leave her lungs. Moonridge, the place that had laughed as she walked away. Evan accepted the folded notice without opening it. But his fingers tightened around the paper until the edges bent. Who supports him? The writer swallowed. Enough frightened houses to make the claim dangerous. Dylan Brooks has offered Moonridge Hall and pack witnesses. He says he has proof of a border imposter hiding under a false name. The words landed like ice. Emily looked at Evan, waiting for denial, but he gave none. He only folded the notice once and tucked it inside his cloak. You should not have come here in daylight, he told the writer. Then it is true, Emily whispered. Evan turned to her, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked uncertain. Not weak, not exposed. Uncertain how much truth would wound her. Before he could answer, bells rang from the valley road, not the gentle warning bells near the stone house, but village alarm bells, fast and bright. Horses appeared at the ridge, 6 of them, carrying Moonridge riders in formal blue cloaks. Dylan rode at the front, polished and smiling as if he had been waiting all his life to find Emily standing somewhere beneath him. "Emily Carter," he called, his voice carrying across the snow-dusted field. "By order of Moonridge Council, you are to return as a witness in a royal deception inquiry." Evan stepped in front of her. It was a small movement, no raised voice, no threat, yet every horse stopped several yards away, nervous beneath its rider. Dylan noticed. His smile tightened. "Careful, Hale, or whatever name you were using today. You are not being summoned. Not yet." Emily looked from Dylan to the villagers watching from their porches, then to Evan. She understood at once. If Evan resisted, frightened people would suffer the consequences. If she refused, Moonridge would call it guilt. "I will go," she said. Evan turned sharply. "Emily." She held his gaze. "They want me afraid. I know how that works." Something painful moved across his face. "You do not owe them your courage. No," she said softly, "but I owe myself the truth." Dylan dismounted and approached with 2 council escorts, keeping a careful distance from Evan. How touching. The rejected Omega thinks she is brave now. Emily lifted her chin. "I was brave before. You were just too proud to notice." For one breath, no one spoke. Then Dylan gestured toward the waiting horse. As Emily climbed into the saddle, Evan came close enough to touch the hem of her cloak, but he stopped before taking hold of it. "Permission, always. Even now." "Do not sign anything," he said quietly. "Do not let Mason put words in your mouth." Emily looked down at him, at the man who had lied about his name but never about her worth. "Then come for the truth before they bury it." The riders turned toward Moonridge as the sun slid behind the pines. Behind her, Evan stood alone in the road, no longer leaning on his cane. And Emily knew the whole kingdom was about to learn that a quiet man could carry a crown in his silence. Moonridge Hall looked different when Emily returned. Beneath guard lanterns, the ribbons were gone, the candles replaced by council torches, and the mating circle had been covered by a long black carpet as if the pack wanted to hide what had happened there the night before. Yet Emily still felt every echo, the laughter, the wilted flower, the silence that had once tried to swallow her whole. Now the hall was full again, but this time no one came to celebrate. Alphas from nearby houses stood along the walls in formal coats, their faces tight with fear disguised as judgment. At the far end, Lord Mason Crow waited beside the elder table, tall and silver-haired, his raven seal pinned over his heart. He did not look like a traitor. That was what made him dangerous. He looked calm, polished, necessary. Dylan Brooks stood near him with the proud expression of a man who had confused cruelty with courage. "Emily Carter," Mason said, his voice smooth enough to make every word feel rehearsed. "You were taken from this hall last night by a man calling himself Evan Hale. We believe that man is a fraud, using false papers to stir unrest along the Northwood border. You will tell this council what he confessed to you." Emily stood alone before them, no family at her side, no advocate, no Evan. Only the mark of a wilted flower still tied at her wrist, its petals faded but unbroken. "He confessed nothing," she said. A murmur moved through the room. Dylan stepped forward. "Do not protect him. He made a fool of you. He chose you because no one else would ask questions." Emily turned to him slowly. Yesterday, his voice had made her feel small. Tonight, it sounded almost desperate. "You rejected me because you thought worth could be measured by scent, rank, and applause." Her voice trembled once, then steadied. "He offered me a choice when all of you offered me shame." Mason's eyes narrowed, but his smile remained. A touching sentiment, but sentiment does not prove innocence. He lifted a parchment from the table. "Sign a statement declaring that your mate contract was obtained under deception, and Moonridge will restore your place under pack protection." The hall quieted. There it was, dressed as Mercy. A cage with clean hinges. Emily looked at the parchment, then at the people waiting for her to crawl back into the story they understood. The rejected Omega, frightened, grateful, obedient. Her wolf stirred faintly inside her, not strong, but awake enough to stand with her. And if I refuse? Mason folded his hands. Then you tie your fate to a man the realm may soon condemn. Dylan softened his tone, and somehow that made it worse. Emily, be reasonable. He is nothing. A limping stray with a borrowed name. Emily felt the room lean toward her answer. She thought of Evan picking up a crushed flower as if her humiliation deserved tenderness. She thought of medicine bundles in his cloak, of villagers saying he came back because he promised. She thought of his hand stopping at her sleeve because even in fear, he still asked permission. He had nothing when I chose him, she said. That is how I know my choice was real. The words reached the rafters and stayed there. Dylan's face flushed. Mason's smile vanished for half a breath. Elder Marlowe looked down, ashamed too late. You would throw away safety for a stranger? Mason asked. Emily lifted her wrist, the faded flower trembling in the torchlight. No, I would rather stand beside a hidden truth than kneel before a polished lie. A sound rolled through the hall then, low and distant, not thunder, not wind. The great doors shuddered once. Every wolf in the room went still. Emily turned toward the entrance, her heart suddenly certain before her eyes could prove it. Somewhere beyond those doors, Evan had come for the truth. The great doors opened without anyone touching them. Not with force, not with noise, but with the slow certainty of a secret finally stepping into daylight. Cold moonlight poured across the black carpet, and every torch in Moonridge Hall bent low as Evan Hale entered. He still wore the dark cloak. He still carried the cane. But he no longer leaned on it. The limp was gone. The tired curve of his shoulders was gone. Each step carried the weight of command, quiet and absolute. And the wolves nearest the door lowered their eyes before they seemed to understand why. Emily stood frozen at the center of the hall. Her breath caught somewhere between fear and wonder. Evan looked first at her. Not at Mason. Not at Dylan. Not at the council. Her. The world could have collapsed around them. And still his first question lived in his eyes. Are you safe? Emily gave the smallest nod. Only then did he turn toward the elder table. Lord Mason Crow rose slowly, one hand closing over the raven seal at his chest. You are trespassing in a council proceeding. Evan stopped beneath the moon window. Silver light touched his face, and the shadows that had hidden him seemed to fall away by choice. No, he said. I'm ending one. Dylan gave a sharp, nervous laugh. You hear that? The border stray thinks he commands the realm. Evan lowered the cane to the floor. The sound was soft. The reaction was not. Every alpha in the room stiffened, as if an unseen tide had rolled through their bones. The air changed, deepening, brightening, filling with a pressure so ancient that even the proudest wolves forgot their pride. One by one, knees bent, not from fear alone, from recognition. Elder Marlowe's staff slipped from his hand and struck the carpet. By the moon, he whispered. Mason stepped back, his polished face drained of color. Evan reached up and unclasped the cloak at his throat. It fell behind him, revealing a dark, formal coat marked inside the collar with the silver crest of Northwood, a crowned wolf beneath 7 stars. Gasps broke across the hall. Emily heard someone whisper the name before she could shape it herself. Alexander Hale. The Alpha King who had been declared dead. The man they had mocked. The man she had chosen when the room called him nothing. Dylan stared as if the floor had vanished beneath him. That is impossible. Alexander's gaze moved to him, calm and devastating. Many men mistake their ignorance for proof. Then he looked to Mason.
You told the realm I was dead. You used frightened houses, false seals, and the pride of this pack to crown your ambition." Mason tried to speak, but no words came. Alexander lifted one hand, and 2 royal guards stepped through the doors, alive and unharmed, carrying sealed documents with the Northwood crest. "The council will hear the truth in full," he said. "Not from rumors, not from cowards, from evidence."
Emily felt the hall turning, felt every stare that had once burned her with mockery, now shifting in shame. But Alexander did not let them hide inside silence. He walked toward her, stopping just outside the circle where she stood. Before all of Moonridge, he bowed his head. Not as a king lowering himself, as a man honoring the only person who had seen him clearly. "Emily Carter," he said, his voice gentler now. "You stood for me when I gave you no crown to trust, no title to admire, and no power to protect you from their laughter." Her eyes stung, but she did not look away. "You gave me a choice," she whispered. Alexander held out his hand, palm open, waiting. Around them, every wolf in Moonridge Hall remained still. This time, no one laughed when Emily stepped forward. Emily placed her hand in Alexander's, and the room seemed to remember the meaning of silence. It was no longer the silence that had shamed her. It was the silence of witnesses who had finally understood what they had failed to see. Alexander's fingers closed gently around hers, warm and steady, never pulling, never claiming more than she gave. The faded flower at her wrist trembled once, then silver light spilled through its wilted petals as if the moon itself had chosen to answer. A soft glow moved beneath Emily's skin, not frightening, not painful, but familiar, like a voice she had been waiting all her life to hear. Her wolf lifted its head within her soul, weak no longer, and for the first time, Emily felt her own scent rise into the air, clean as winter rain and sweet as wild roses after snow. The wolves around the hall gasped. Elder Marlowe sank to one knee, not because Alexander commanded it, but because the truth had become too bright to stand against. "She was never scentless," he whispered. "She was hidden." Dylan's face changed then, all arrogance falling away into something smaller. He looked at Emily as if seeing the person he had thrown aside only after a king had reached for her hand. "Emily," he began, but Alexander's voice stopped him without cruelty. "You will apologize to her, not because she is beside a crown, but because she was worthy before you knew who stood beside her." Dylan lowered his eyes. His apology came quiet, uneven, and late. Emily listened, but she did not let it decide her value. She had spent too many years waiting for people like him to name her worthy. Now she understood. Worth did not arrive when others noticed it. It had been there, breathing under the hurt, waiting for her to stand. Lord Mason Crowe was taken into custody by the royal guard, not with spectacle, but with the calm order of a kingdom being restored. The false documents were gathered, the frightened houses would be told the truth, and Moonridge, once so eager to laugh, now watched as Alexander turned to Emily before them all. "You accepted the man beneath the crown," he said. "Now, if your heart allows it, stand beside the crown, not below it." Emily looked at the hall, at the moon window, at the circle where she had nearly believed herself unwanted. Then she looked at the man who had carried power like a burden and kindness like a secret. "I will stand beside you," she said, "but never below anyone again." Alexander smiled then, small and real, and bowed over her hand as moonlight filled the hall. The pack had rejected her as nothing. The king returned to prove she was his everything. And maybe that is the lesson hidden inside Emily's story. The world often misjudges gentle people because gentleness does not make noise. It does not demand attention. It does not always wear a crown, a title, or a perfect name. But true strength is not the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it is the person who still chooses kindness after being humiliated,
who still sees dignity in someone others mock, who refuses to let rejection become their identity. In my view, Emily did not become powerful because Alexander chose her. She became powerful the moment she chose with courage instead of fear. So tell me in the comments, would you have trusted Evan before knowing who he truly was? And if this story reminded you that love can find the overlooked and restore the broken, subscribe for more stories where destiny protects the gentle-hearted.